They have to try this 3 times before they find the right one. I mean, they could be so boring sometimes. And even sometime in the Sunday school, I think people just sit there and nod their heads. Yeah. Right. And I don't really know if there is any questions or not. But I heard that for 16 years in a row, every 4th year. So, so I think that could be boring. But I think generally, I think women could be happy and are happy, and at least we were. Sometimes we didn't laugh that much, but we cried a lot. So, all right.
I think Mormons are happy a lot of the time, just as much as anybody else is happy, like you said. But something that I've observed, at least in my own personal experience and in my own family, is that it's a very fragile happiness. My parents are very happy people and were very happy when all of their daughters were getting married in the temple and their sons were contemplating missions, and everyone was doing as they were supposed to. And even a slight deviation from that plan caused unimaginable grief. And that's not true for all Mormons. There are Mormon people who deal with that better and are still very happy and are more nuanced in their thought. But I think for a lot of Mormon families, the happiness is there and it's real and it's genuine as long as a specified path is being followed. And they've been conditioned that even a small deviation, I've had relatives who sobbed when their son didn't wear a white church to the sacrament meeting, and that's not strong, resilient happiness. That's very fragile happiness, but again, I hate making generalizations. If you're a Mormon and you're out there and you're happy, my husband's very happy, like almost irritatingly so. And, he's one.
I want to add one thing to that, which is that I think one of the difficulties, and maybe possibly to the point of what you're asking, is that if you're not happy inside a system where you're supposed to be happy, that becomes a very lonely existence. And I think that is a dilemma that happens to everyone. I think a real strength of a community like this is that we're kind of a little more resilient about not being happy too. That there are reasons you could be happy and it's okay, and you've got someone you can talk to, and that there won't be a problem. They won't have a problem with you because you're unhappy. And I think that's maybe a fragile thing for certain individuals. So I didn't want to generalize that to a group and say, here's this whole group that's unhappy. But I think it can be a very lonely place to be unhappy.
Okay, I left the church about 20 years ago, okay? Before that, I was in for about 30 years. And I was very TDM, I was the last member of my family to leave. Everybody would stay home, I'd go to church, for 3 hours. But once I got out, for like 13, 14 years, I didn't do any church or anything, okay? And so I missed a lot of what Stephanie and, the gay community has gone through. And I've been reading some things, there are a lot of people with a lot of pain. I would go on the Recovery from Mormonism board a lot, and I would see a lot of people who are grieving and in some very sad situations, and I feel very, very sad for them. And I try to explain some of my travels. Personally, right now, I do go to a church. I go to a Christian church, and it took a long time for me to get back to that point. I have, gone full circle. I was a convert, so I had a reference, prior to becoming LDS. And eventually, I went back to where I had been prior to becoming LDS, back to something I felt comfortable with as a child. And I feel comfort with that now. And I would try to comfort people, but it's very difficult not knowing where they are. And so I've been reading some some comments, and there's a woman in New Zealand that I follow. Her name is Gina Colvin. And I listened to her, and she's got a lot of pain. But then I'm wondering how long she's going to still be in the church because of, what she talks about. I keep wondering, this woman's going to get excommunicated with her opinions that she speaks. And for Stephanie primarily, what happens to you when the church comes down on you?
Well, it sucks. Oh, sorry, I guess I should, well, shoot. I said it sucks, that's not a very eloquent answer. I think when it comes down on you, and I mean, I don't know if I'm the necessarily best person to qualify. I read something, I'm stealing this from a book and I can't attribute it correctly, that you don't leave something that is familiar and important to you until you reach that maximum threshold for pain, when it becomes so unsafe to stay where you are that you're forced to leave. And I think that might explain why that woman you follow is maybe still in the church, that because for right now, where she is painful, but the outside world is still more painful. And eventually you get to that point where being in the church is so painful that the outside world, with all of its leaving, with all of its pain and its agony, becomes the less painful option. I mean, it's just a human survival instinct to go where you feel the least amount of pain. It took me about 7 years to fully leave. And some people leave so quickly and it's great for them, but it took me a long time. And so when it comes down, it's actually really relieving in a way. It's painful and it's hard. But I think the feeling I remember feeling the most was just this huge relief that I was done. And in an ironic way, it was a very spiritual experience to really finally be done. And the way I describe it is all of a sudden, the world was full of color again. It was black and white, and it was horrible, and it was painful, and as crappy and terrible as it was to leave, and painful, and I still feel some pain, I keep seeing the world in color, and so that made it worth it. So that's what happened to me. When I left, the world went back into color, and it was amazing and miraculous in a lot of ways. So it sucked, but then it got better.
Birgit, I have a question for you. I have a couple of really close ex-Mormon women friends, and they were converts. One in particular joined when she was 19 and exited when she was about 52, something like that. And her family of origin, of course, they loved it that she was out. And she felt like, quote unquote, coming home because now she was one with her family again. Did you experience that recently, or how's your family reacted to what's gone on?
That's exactly what I can feel also. We have all been very close to each other, but when we told them where we were experienced, they were so loving and compassionate, and they really wanted to know. So we have really told our story to them, and they are so supportive, and I really, really feel so close to them. So that's so good, so good. Yeah, before that.
I asked if they were nice to her when we were active.
Yeah, they were, but you didn't feel you were really connected because you have different views on things, and you couldn't really get together and have these conversations that got deep, or because you always respected each other. And I remember when our kids were going to get married, my father, he we invited all to the reception, of course, but he gave us a phone call and he said, you know, I would love to be there, I love you, my grandkids, but because we are not allowed to go into the temple, we will not come. And he said, we love you and we love you, the grandkids, but we feel we are not allowed to be with you at the most happiest moment, so we will stay home, he said. So that's hard, and I really felt sorry for them to not be able to be with us. So anyway, they were able to be with our youngest daughter. She got married in the Lutheran church, and everybody could come, and it was a great party.
Okay.
Behind you, over here.
Okay. Okay, Stephanie, this is for you, dear. Okay, so I tend to be a little bit extreme, a little black and white. When I'm in, I'm in. I'm out, and I'm not a fence sitter. And so a lot of times when I've been, reading all the things about people leaving the church and so forth, and I'm reading about the women who want equality in the church and the LGBT people, and they stay in the church and they say they want to change the church from within. I have to admit, I'm always baffled by that, because I'm thinking to myself, well, actually out loud, I think, okay, so the church is extremely authoritarian, and it claims that they're getting constant revelation from God, that the prophet speaks with God on a regular basis. The prophet speaks with God and gets constant guidance and so forth. And so I'm always thinking, so I'm wondering what's going on in the minds of people who feel like members, that they are the ones who can inform the prophet. Like, okay, so are they, so I wonder what you're thinking. Do you get my question? Okay.
Yeah, I understand your question. I have to go back to my mindset work. I believed that way. I think people who want to stay and change the church from within are maybe just as driven and passionate about their cause as the people who leave, and then the people who stay and are true believers. It just manifests itself in a different way. And I think the thing about the people like that is they study the history of the church, where individual members did have more power to influence policy and decision. And Mormonism is such a strange religion, because if a 14-year-old boy can talk to God, then why not a member? And I think the authoritarian nature of the church historically is new. It's a byproduct of correlation from the 80s and 90s, in which we all conform to the exact same thing. But if you talk to other members, older members sometimes, or people who are very familiar with church history, it wasn't always like that. We were an uncorrelated church, and people were coming up with new ideas all the time and enacting them, and if no one stopped them, it was considered good. And I think newer generations of Mormons who study the history, because it's now all readily available, are saying, why did we give that up? Why are we correlating? And so I think they believe they have the power to make that change. And the mindset of younger Mormons is much more about personal revelation rather than that authoritarian mindset of, revelation trickling down to the masses. And I think that's a short answer. I hope that was sufficient. But there's evidence in Mormonism that that's acceptable and appropriate. And then they try, and then they get kicked down, and then they leave.
Yeah. I guess I interpret it always as the church. You had personal revelation for yourself.
Right.
But the church leaders, they speak for the general population, and when I just say, I'm done with you then, But so I just couldn't figure out how, like I would think you're losing faith in the leaders, like they don't really speak with God, you know what I'm saying? So, but
that makes sense.
Can I add something? Not everyone experiences the same church. The church is very different for different individuals, and people have very different reasons. I want to give a different paradigm for looking at that. some people experience the church as their cultural identity. And the only way to look at that is issues that are similar to becoming an expatriate. Now, I may vehemently disagree with the government in my country, but I don't want to leave my country. I don't want to leave my people. I don't want to leave my homeland. There are a lot of people in that position, and so they are fighting to create a place where they can exist in the place that they were born. And I think that's a very valid thing, and so I would argue that some of them probably don't see the leaders as inspired, but most of the people I've talked to are Americans, and Americans have very deeply ingrained in them that idea that I can fight for the place that I live to be a place that I can stand to live. And I think that's partially what's going on for a lot of individuals.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Did you turn it on? Peter, you put up something on the board that was so profound, and that was, you don't have to be good. And it was kind of meaningful in the sense that, and it goes with my question, is when we were thinking about things, and started our journey of reading and doing things and participating in that event. I remember our first thing was we would only read source material. We were even going to be good in our activism or our leading. We were going to be good through the whole process. And my question is, we both consider ourselves smart people, and yet we go 60 years of our life before we notice these things. And how did that happen? How did we? I read section 132 and I cringe. And there's how did that over? Do you know what I'm saying? How did all of that? How does that occur? Were there psychological things at play? All of you can answer because you've all been experienced that or been wounded by that. But anyway, so.
Well, I mean, the short answer is we're humans, and we can be tricked into things. We can miss things. We have loopholes where we don't notice things that should be obvious. I still discover things that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I never saw that before. I really appreciate you speaking a little eloquently too. I think a lot of people go through this process of, oh, I'm going to exit correctly. I'm going to study correctly. I'm going to speak with my family correctly. I mean, I remember that. I was my poor wife, who is not quite as uptight and anxious as I am, had to live with me like, no, we're not going to use that source. We're going to find this source. And we're not going to talk about that way because that might not, I've had to work really hard to loosen myself up and say, making mistakes is okay. Because you're going to make them whether or not you try and be good. So I don't know that I've answered your question about how could this happen. I guess I would say, how come American history isn't taught correctly either, and most of us don't notice that. Well, how it could happen is that the people you trust around you failed to notice and maybe didn't question, and that we as humans have our own innate biases to see our in-group as correct and out-groups as not correct. It's maybe a mental flaw that our species has, that something could happen better. You might can speak to the history piece of it.
Well, I'm looking at Jean here, and with regard to that, open an American history high school textbook that is used in American schools, and read about the American Revolution. Then go get a Canadian high school history book and see what they rewrite about the American Revolution. Absolutely, we only invaded them 3 times between the American Revolution and the War of 1812. The same facts are common to both books. The interpretations are different.
Yes. All right. Is this on? So my question is for you, Peter. Yesterday, when you talked about relationships with family, as we leave, a lot of time there's a lot of, clearly all the steps, but anger is a big one of them. Something I'm facing with my family is the very Mormon no anger. On one side, I'm super grateful that my parents to say, I love you unconditionally, but when Margarita just said that, it made me think, yes, I have no connection. I have this these parents who thankfully are trying to be a part of my family and a part of my life. Yet there's this gigantic elephant in the room that needs discussion that is not happening. We've had an initial discussion, but it's almost like, let's just have joy and move on. But I feel very broken not having a relationship any longer. And I just wonder, is the advice from any of you, you need to start a new relationship, and this is the new relationship. Or do you try to bridge the gap? Is this the overarching no problems, let's move forward that is so difficult? Because I feel so empty and anxious when I leave them, just wanting more, I guess.
Well, you're not alone. The first thing I would say, and the answer, I think, to your question is both. I think there's some very real boundaries that there's no way around for a lot of families. It's not so, just a heart-rending question, so thank you for asking it. There are situations where I think people run into a lot. I desperately want the relationship I had, or thought I had, and probably did have, with my family. And all of a sudden there's this spot at which I'm in need and in pain, and you can't help me or won't help me. So there's this incredible sense of betrayal, because these are your parents. These are the people who you would look to at your worst moment in life to be there for you, to talk you through it, and they're gone. And you can't approach it, and that's very hard. And I would say the answer to that question is that could take a long time, and you probably need someone right now, and you're going to feel very betrayed. And that's normal. The flip side of it is that doesn't have to be the end of the story. They also need time, and they probably also are feeling the same thing you're feeling. In some ways, they might not express it to you, because that would be possibly threatening. But most families that I've worked with, the other side of it, they feel almost exactly the same. So the best thing I can say is, if there's any way to drop the content, the specific content, and approach it from an emotional basis of, I'm just in terrible pain, I bet you are too, can we be there for each other? Obviously, if I need to talk through it, detail-wise, content-wise, I need someone else. But perhaps we could both see each other's pain. This is one of the reasons, one of the suggestions was, be as vulnerable as possible with your emotions, and drop any agenda for, I want you to think differently. Try that out and see what can happen, because if you can hold each other in that space, you can at least know both of us hurt, we care deeply about each other, there are ways we can't be there for each other, we acknowledge that, and it's hard. That's as near as I've found to a solution for that, for myself, and as I've watched people go through this for them. But a real emphasis on the shared experience and the shared emotions of the process, and as much as possible, and it requires family who agree to drop their agenda as well. So they need to also be vulnerable enough to enter that. The last piece is a community I would look to see how they've handled it well is the LGBT community. Many of them have, this is so similar to what they go through coming out. And many of them discover, I have to create a new family for myself. And I want to heal my family, but I can't go with no family for 20 years until mom and dad figure it out. Or until my brother or sister figure it out. I have to have a family. And they surround themselves with a new family, and they keep reaching out and working on the family that they grew up with.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really.
I've never had a chance to ask a general authorities or former general authorities wife a question before that I always had, so now I have a chance, I'm going to ask it. And this, also it's kind of related to something else that's been on some of the critical Mormon websites lately that I caught my attention that I wouldn't even realize myself. The little story about how at General Conference, one of the new apostles accepted the calling without even asking his wife. At least that's how the story went. We don't know the details. Elder Stevenson, well, he told the story in General Conference that when he was called in by President Monson and whoever else was there to be an apostle, he said yes, and then there was criticism from some women that, well, shouldn't he have asked his wife first, or couldn't his wife have been there? So I'm curious, Brigitta, as a general authority's wife, did you ever feel, with your husband having such prominent church positions, honestly, did you ever feel that you weren't as important as him? Or did you justify it like I think many women do, that, well, being a mother is just as important? But did you honestly ever feel that you weren't as important as your husband because he had the big church callings?
First I want to say that when he got his calling, I was with him. But they really didn't ask me first what my opinion was on that, because, and I think that's so sad, that because as a wife, you know probably more about your husband than anyone do. You live with him 24/7. And it could be interesting. I'm, in my personality, I'm quite different from Hans. I don't like to be up on the stage so much, and I know he loves that. So I was quite happy. I didn't feel, but at the same time, I know there's a lot